It's the Hot Rod Podcast with Ron Foreman and Brady Wright. We literally live, eat, and breathe cars. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Make sure that you hit the subscribe and the like button, mash the notifications on so that you'll know every time we put a new show together and bring it to you here on YouTube. Time to get going. Let's see what's happening this week. Hi, Brady Wright for Ron Foreman tonight, and this is going to be a little bit different show than usual. Normally, Ron would be here and we would have a great conversation, but Ron, where he lives, has a power outage tonight, so we're not going to be able to have him on. He's missing this whole situation because tonight is a pretty special one. It is part 3 of Dave and Charlie Maxwell and some inside stuff on Harold LeMay, the man. Let's take a look at it. We'll come back right after. You're into cars. You love a good time, and you'd rather build it than buy it. You just might love the Rat Bastards. We're a family-oriented, nonprofit organization. We welcome all 1969 and older. In the rough is enough, real steel and iron. We're about old-school, traditional hot rods and rat rods. We get together, have fun, help each other build, and cruise like crazy, because that's the way car clubs are supposed to be. The Rat Bastards are a new class of old school, and our signature event is the Infestation Show every July. Check our Facebook page for location, time, and dates. We're charter sponsors of the Idaho Hot Rod Hall of Fame and the Hot Rod Podcast. Join us at cruise-ins all over Washington and Idaho. Joining the club is easy. By the way, contact us through the club page for Washington or Idaho. Check us out on the Rat Bastards Car Club pages on Facebook. We'll see you on the road. As promised, it is part 3 of the story about the LeMay collection with Dave and Charlie Maxwell, Charlie better known as Bubby. I'm glad you guys are here tonight. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate it.
Yeah. So for those who haven't maybe seen part 1 or part 2, or if you just want to get a recap, because I can do that, part 1 was kind of stuff about the LeMay collection in general and how you and Harold were kind of connected. Part 2 was a lot about some of the vehicles that were down there, but you promised me some good stuff, Bubby, on part 3 about Harold here as the man. Harold, the things that he did kind of behind the scenes and stuff. And I'm sure that, we'll have lots of questions. By the way, before we jump in, I just want to let everybody know, Ron Foreman, my co-host, normally would be here at this time, but Ron lives in a town just outside Monroe in Western Washington, and they're out of power tonight. So if he gets his power back, he will come in. If he doesn't, he won't. So we're going to just kind of hope he makes it. But in any case, we'll continue with the show because we got X amount of time to do it. So I don't know. Let's start with some kind of a story that nobody else knows about Harold LeMay. Oh, and by the way, Dave, as long as you're here, try not to make so much noise this time.
I know it. You know, it's hard to get a word in edgewise.
Hogging the whole show, and if you want to jump in sometime, just go right ahead.
No, I got so much to say,
and you do.
I just enjoy hearing the stories and the history.
There's some great
that's
stories.
all part of my dad. So how can I not enjoy that?
Exactly. He's my fault.
That's right. It's his fault.
He's my fault.
You're taking the blame, huh?
Yeah.
It seems like it turned out okay.
Well, anyway, one of the things that, and some people know this story about Harold, but his mother was a single parent, had 2 boys and a girl. Buzz and Ginger and Harold. And this was back, he was born in September 4, 1919. So this was in the 20s and things were really, really tough. And Harold was sent to live with a family that he called aunt and uncle out in the South County in Pierce County. And but they were no relation. And he was approximately 8 years old. And the day that he was to go, he didn't want to go. He was fussing. And the gentleman was driving a baby grand Chevrolet touring car.
Oh, okay.
And he said to Harold, he says, "Get up here and help me drive this car. This is going to be your car." And he jumped up in his lap and had that big fat man's breakaway steering column and wheel. And Harold drove that car down the road. And he went to live with them out in an area called Kapowson. And
Yes.
he often wondered, gee, Buzz and Ginger living with mom, he kind of sort of felt like maybe he was given away.
Hmm.
But it was the best thing for him because she just couldn't financially keep the family all together.
Sure.
Well, when he went out there, um, he got to thinking, if anybody is going to look after Harold and take care of him, it's going to be Harold himself. And he
Yeah.
became incredibly self reliant. And there's a story that I share about him that really makes a lot of sense and about his life. And one of the responsibilities he had there living on that farm with that family was that he had to get the chickens in the hen house at night.
Yeah.
And he'd go in there and he had a little rat terrier dog. And when he'd get in there under the roost, you'd see rats running around. And he said, that little dog would chase a rat here and he'd chase a rat there and chase a rat here. And he says, he never caught a rat. But he says, Charlie, that dog got smart. He focused on one rat at a time and bingo, he nailed that rat. And he says it was no time. He says that dog caught every rat in that hen house. He says, I learned from that dog. Stay focused on your objective. Don't chase this one willy-nilly here and willy-nilly there, but
Yeah.
stay focused on what you're about to do or trying to do. You'll get a lot more accomplished in life. So those were some of the impressions upon Harold as a young man, growing up, living with a family that really wasn't related. And it proved later in life to be very valuable lessons to learn. One of the things about Harold was when he graduated from Kapowsin High School, in their annual yearbook, he was chosen least likely to succeed. And it was amazing how his life turned out. And as he became successful, he liked the number 13. In fact, one of his tow trucks, a 56 GMC, that he restored or converted years ago to natural gas, propane. He was very innovative, and so anyway, as his life progressed, he became very successful. And they would say, "Oh, Lucky LeMay." They called him Lucky LeMay. So on his garbage truck, or rather his tow truck, he put Lucky 13 on there. And he had all kinds of ideas. He converted that to propane back when that was a new truck. He put 56 Chevy taillights in it. And, where you fuel the door, one of the taillights drops down. Well,
Right.
he had those doors, those taillights on both sides. And he had propane tanks in there and propane hoses,
Ah.
and he could fuel it. But he also, he was always thinking ahead of time, he put a hitch on it that had all of the balls on it, and then it would swivel, and whatever ball for a trailer hitch, he just swivel it, pin it, and he was good to go, And
That's great.
he did that as a young man. I mean, that was done years ago, and we have since restored that truck back to the way it was when he had it as an operational tow truck.
Isn't that, I mean, I have a sort of a personal aside. The very first work truck that I ever drove when I was working for my dad's plumbing and heating company was a 56 GMC truck. I think it was a 1 ton. And God, I remember that thing was, just a pain. I can't imagine how somebody would have put 56 Chevy taillights on it, though. That's quite a bit of work, to
Exactly.
make it there. I had a 56 Bel Air for a while, and I know intimately how those taillights were. Get filler taillights, work. That's a pretty interesting thing to do back. I mean, what year was this? Do you know?
Um, well, it was probably 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah.
The thing about it was he had a friend that had a body shop, and so he did some custom body work on that truck,
Yeah.
and they used it for years, and then it sat in storage, and then after he passed away, we restored that truck, and I was able to locate the old guy that did the body work on that truck. And
Oh,
he lived out in the South County. I knew his son. His son was a retired Pierce County sheriff officer, and we brought him down somewhere in my collection of stuff. I've got pictures of him standing by that truck that he did a lot of that custom work for Harold back in the day, you know.
That's pretty cool.
If you ever get a chance back when you're back out there, try to find that truck. It's somewhere probably at Marymount.
I'll send some pictures. It's a beautiful truck.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a featured truck, right, Dad?
It was. And I've driven that truck. It drives nice, you know.
Yeah. But I'm going back and forth 3 times in July, so I'll see if I can cut a day free and go down there check it out.
One of the things about Harold was he always wanted to do the right thing. He was very conscientious about that. And when I was managing the Lakewood division of the business for him, he called me up one day and he said, Charlie, he says, I've got something that's really troubling me. He says, there's an ad in the newspaper and it's in the phone number. They say they're from Lakewood. And it's the ad said, if you've had any bad business dealings with HE, call this number. Well, Harold's name was Harold Eugene LeMay, and he often went by H.E. LeMay. And he said, would you call that number? And it's in Lakewood there where you're running the operation, and find out what that's about, because it really bothers me to think that somebody might confuse that for me. And so I called the number and an older lady answered, and I told her who I was, manager of Lakewood Refuse Service for the LeMay family. And I says, Mr. LeMay's initials are HE, and he's thinking that you've had a bad experience. And she's, oh no, I feel so bad. She says, HE was somebody else that I'd made some investments with, and he was fraudulent. And she says, I'll take that ad down immediately. She says, I'm so sorry, so sorry. I will take it down. And so I called Harold and let him know right away that what was taking place, and that it wasn't him at all. And it was just a bad experience that she had. And so she didn't want to put the full name in there, but she put HE in there. Apparently this person went by HE, you know, and it was just a unfortunate situation.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that she was willing to take it down, though. I mean, especially, you know, back in the day, there wasn't, you know, phones and everything else. I mean, you in order for something to go, what would have been viral, that, you know, the newspaper ad was it. And it's pretty good.
Exactly.
Because everybody would have seen it.
Yeah. Another time, well, this was after Harold passed away. A young man attended the services, and he come up to me and he said, I want to tell you a story about Harold LeMay. And I says, you do? And he says, yes. He says, when I was a little boy, my mom was a single parent, and there were several kids in our family, and we rented a home from Harold LeMay. And he said, you know, one day my mom was by their office paying the rent, and Harold stopped to talk to her, and he says, you know, how long have you been renting that house? And she's told him how many years it was. And he says, well, why don't you just buy that house? And she says, Mr. LeMay, I don't have any money for a down payment. He says, look, he says, you've been renting that house from me for so many years. He says, let's just consider that your down payment, and we'll sell you that house. And Harold sold him the house. And the young man says, if it hadn't been for Mr. LeMay's generosity, my mom would have never owned a home.
Isn't that something?
That is amazing. Amazing story. Yeah. You know, the
people think, you know, they know somebody who might have done something like this. It's pretty refreshing to know that it actually existed, you know, and that was before rent to own was even a thing, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, the way real estate is now, you know, when you're going to do that, you know, you're going to put money down someplace. That's a pretty incredible thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. One time, Harold and I were on a hunt for a car, and on our way back, we stopped out in Yelm at a restaurant to get some dinner. That's one of the ways he always wanted to thank people, is that he'd feed you. Either we went to the house and Nancy would fix up something, or we'd stop at a restaurant. And so we were sitting there eating, and a young man came up to Harold and I, and he says, I know who you are. And he says, you do? He says, yes, you're Harold LeMay. He says, I don't know if you remember me, but when I was a little boy, he says, you used to gather up all the neighbor kids put them in your old car and take us to the skating rink and take us roller skating. He says, yes, I remember that. What's your name? And he says, oh, I remember you now. And he was one of the neighborhood kids. And Harold said, get them all, get him in the car. And he'd take him to the roller skating rink because he loved to roller skate.
Sure.
You know?
That's a great deal.
Yeah. That was kind of the way he was, there's so many stories and the way his impressions on people. One time, Harold and I went alone. My wife was doing something, and his wife Nancy was doing something, and so it was just him and I going to a charity auction, and for the Lions Club, and there was an old antique-looking car there, and a lady, good friend, Andy Vernon, came up and she says, "Harold, are you going to buy that car?" And Harold said, "Boy, I'm not sure." He says, "I got to be careful about what I buy, because if something ever happens to me, I don't want Nancy to be burdened with a bunch of cars with questionable titles." And he says, "I'm not sure that car is correctly titled." So he says, "I don't think I'm going to buy it." And she looked at him. She says, "I got you figured out." And he says, "You do?" And she says, "Yes, you're thrifty on some things so you can be spendy on others." And Harold said, "You're exactly right." He says, "I see young people doing things that I would never dream of doing." And she says, I see that about you. He said, I used to laugh. Nancy bought him a new suit. And if I remember right, it might even have been a tuxedo, but whenever we went to somewhere, he would wear that, And he said to me one time, he says, "Charlie," he says, "I got to get my money out of this thing." She spent a lot of money on this. I got to wear it every chance I get. But that's the way he was. He was just so down to earth, and he was just he was a man of faith as well. He his car show used to be on Sundays. When we first had the very first car shows, it was a Sunday, and of course he knows that I'm a man of faith as well. And one day he says, "Charlie, something's bothering you." And he says, "I think I know what it is." And we had gone for a ride over to one of his properties to get some lumber that was stored in an old container. And he says, "I think I know what it is." And I says, "What's that, Harold?" He says, "It's bothering you to have the car show on Sunday." I says, "Yes, it is. I have some responsibilities with my church, and it is bothering me to do it on the Sabbath day." He says, "Then we'll change it." I said, "Well, I don't know that we can here." And several people that were instrumental in the show back in the day says, "You can't do that. It's always been on the last Sunday of August." But Harold says, "We can and we will." And we changed it to Saturday, and to this day, it's always been the last Saturday in August. So that's just some of the things about his character that he could sense, that something was bothering me, but he shared that same concern, and so I really respected him for that.
What's pretty, I think everybody who's ever produced a car show or an event of any kind, really, and I've done my share of both, you run into some of that just about everywhere. Like, well, it's always been this way, so it must continue to be this way. And no, at all. You can always make a change, and in a lot of cases, you don't even have to have a reason, except it'd work better on this day or this time or this. That's easy stuff. Inertia is a real tough thing to get some people to overcome.
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
in fact,
exactly.
You'll actually appreciate this one. I was working with a Chamber of Commerce to produce a car show years ago, and we produced it 6-7 years, and it was always on Sunday because that's when they wanted to do it. And it was in the middle of town. It was about 6 square blocks in the middle of a relatively small town, and a lot of cars. It was a good, successful show. But the vendors, the businesses, they didn't want to be open then because it was Sunday, and we totally got that. But we said, look, for this one Sunday a year, maybe you could put a crew in there, because we can bring in food vendors, we can bring in ice cream trucks and stuff like that, but you guys could make some money on that day if you wanted to be open. And one of the things that they said to us was, "I don't want to be open because I'm worried about theft. I'm worried about shoplifting." We're bringing 10,000 people to this thing, Don't
Mhm.
you think you could make it? I mean, it took 2 years to convince them that that would be an okay idea. And it was just because they'd never done it before.
Inertia is
Yeah.
connected to the minutia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You gotta get that moved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Well, one of the things that I admired most about Harold was that he put trust in people. He had a great way of measuring people. And one year we flew back to Hershey, Pennsylvania for the big swap meet, and he had ordered a new rollback truck, and he put trust in me to drive that truck all the way back home from Hershey by myself. And on it, he had a 37 Ford Phaeton, and I picked up a 37 Ford convertible coupe in Deer Lodge, Montana, at the Montana State Prison, where the Tau Museum was once housed, you know. But here he trusted me to drive alone with two of his valuable cars on there. And I was so concerned that when we left, before we left, we on that Phaeton, it had side curtains, and we took them off because we didn't want to be going down the road at 60 miles an hour and have those side curtains blow off and lose them, you know,
Or
because they
shred
had
them.
glass windows in them and stuff.
Yeah.
And so we took them off. And then, of course, Harold, you know, if you weren't overweight, you didn't load it right. So we had everything he could think of that he bought stuffed inside that Phaeton.
Of course.
But there was no windows on the sides. Well, I got into Ohio, and all of a sudden I'm getting into a thunderstorm. So I went behind a supermarket in a shopping center, and I got in one of their dumpsters, and I dug out I dug out a bunch of big cardboard boxes that I could break up, and I made cardboard windows that I stuck up under the top and down inside the door panels, you know, and it kept the rain out, you know, and it worked. And then when I got to Deer Lodge, Montana, and where Harold had bought this car from the sale of that, because the government forced the Tau family to liquidate that collection. I picked up that 37 convertible, and I put it on the Stinger, which is the wheel lift on the back of that truck. We call it a Stinger. And I didn't want to take a chance of losing it. And I had it on there, and man, I tied it down with every strap I had, and you name it. So, and then I stayed at the motel across the street, and I got a room with a window so I could look out at night and make sure nobody was messing with those cars. Because here I had two of Harold's cars plus a brand new rollback truck that he hadn't even driven yet. But I got home, and he went to help me unload. He says, "Boy," he says, "you really had this car tied down tight, Charlie." And I says, "Yeah, I didn't want nothing getting loose on me." He says, "Well, it wasn't going to get loose."
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, you do what you got to do.
That's right.
And I bet you that Phaeton had a little bit of the Beverly Hillbillies look to it with all that cardboard in the windows and stuff.
Oh, it did. I tell you what, some of the loads that came home from Hershey looked like Beverly Hillbillies. Like that leads me into another story. One year, my dear friend Jimmy Benham, and Jimmy Benham has a Benham Speed Shop, and he painted my 51 Mercury convertible. And he's a fabulous painter. He doesn't paint commercially, but he is a good painter. In fact, people look at my car and they say, somebody knows how to lay paint down. And that's Jimmy Benham. But Jimmy and I drove a camper that Harold was a Ford chassis that he built. The back of it, the back half was a small camper up over the cab, but the back you could put a car in.
Oh, okay.
And so we hauled the car back there for somebody, a friend, and we pulled a trailer because we had a fire truck to bring home. Now, Harold had bought a Hahn fire truck. And so anyway, while we were back there, we loaded a Model A sedan inside the motorhome. And then on the trailer, we put this Hahn fire truck. Now, that's a single car trailer. But of course, Harold, he knew how to get two cars on a one-car trailer. He was good at that. But anyway, we put it on there. And he had also purchased, I think it was a 1938, I know it's a Case tractor, beautiful tractor that we restored since from our dear friend out of New York Sonny, we called him. And but anyway, Harold wanted me to pull the ramps out of the back of the trailer and put the rear wheels of the tractor on the ramps, and then the two front wheels up in the back of the fire truck. Well, I'd learned before from Harold that he taught me a lesson. You got to be careful how you load your load, because if you have weight behind the axle, you go down the road and you're going to fish
swing. Yeah.
There you go. So I said, there ain't no way we're putting that under. And of course, Harold could have done it, and he probably would have been successful getting it home. But I said, I am not taking that home, because one year we were hauling cars out of some property in Eastern Washington where he used to, it was a lumber yard, and he used to store some cars over there. And we were hauling them home. I always beat him home because the rollback I was driving had a turbo on it, and it was faster than the one he was driving. And I'd be home by a half hour ahead of him, and I'd be sitting there eating dinner with Nancy when he pulled in the yard. Well, I didn't pay attention to the last load that he put on that trailer, because it was a Pontiac, and he put it on backwards, so the engine was behind the rear end. So I took off down the road, heading for home like I always do. He called me Charging Charlie, and I'm on the side of the road because my trailer's going just like this. It's whipping everywhere, and I'm tying my straps right down. And he pulled up alongside of me, and he says, "What's the matter, Charlie?" And I says, "We loaded this thing wrong." I says, "All the weight's behind the axle." He said, "See ya." And he gunned it and took off. So I can only go about 45 or 50 miles an hour down the road. So finally, when I pulled in the yard, he was sitting there eating dinner, laughing, and he told that story to everybody. He loved telling it. But the rest of the story about coming home from Pennsylvania with that fire truck is that little motorhome had a turbo on it. Now that load was heavy. We had a Model A inside of it, but that fire truck on that trailer was heavy. We got to the Mission Range of the Rocky Mountains coming west, and we could barely, the turbo started to fail. And we barely got, we were down to like 4 miles an hour going up over the Rocky Mountains. And poor Jimmy Benham's knuckles were white as snow, but we made it home. But that was quite a load, that was just one of those trips that, like Doug always says, if you have no adversity, you got nothing to remember it for.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've been over that range, and that's load for sure. Well, Charlie, we got time for about one more story. What do you got that's a quick one?
Well, one thing I want to correct is that we were talking about the Kaisers last session, and the last car Harold bought was actually a Willys, I believe a 49 Willys. I was troubled by that statement I made, and so I said to Doug, he says, I don't think it was a Willys, but he says, I can't remember what it was. And then finally I sent him a text. I says, it was or Kaiser. I said, it was a Willys, But last time Ron talked about his family owning some Edsel cars.
Yeah.
Well, at this last auction, there was a beautiful Edsel station wagon, and I mean beautiful, all original looking appearance. And Doug LeMay bought the car. So now there's an Edsel station wagon in the collection.
Oh, Ron will be thrilled.
Yeah, it's a good looking car.
Those things, they didn't make very many of the station wagons.
No, not at all.
That's worth something just because it's a station wagon.
Yeah.
I'm sure it can be, restored real nice. That's grand.
Well, there's a lot of stories to tell.
And Dave will appreciate this because you might have seen it. I was driving around today, and here driving down the street in little old Post Falls, Idaho, was a perfectly nice, all there Henry J.
Oh.
And wonder of wonders, it wasn't a gasser.
Oh,
yeah, that's right.
It was dead stock, right, and I thought, who's got a stock Henry J? But I know there's at least two of them here that I've seen. One of them,
right.
Yeah, I thought
you'd blue, old blue. Yeah. Oh yeah, they're all blue.
They're all blue. Or rust. Yep. It seems to be the two combinations. Yeah. Well, Charlie, I really appreciate you doing this 3 times in a row. I mean, most people who haven't been to the LeMay collection, it's definitely on their list. And for those who have, it's on the return list over and over again. And seeing the cars is fantastic. And look, getting some time to talk to the people at the museum, or Marymount, it's wonderful because you hear all those stories. But learning something about the man and the family and how some of those things came to be, that stuff is priceless. And I can't thank you enough for being willing to come here and tell us the stories. It's just grand. I'm going to hereby offer you an open invitation. If you think of something that you didn't say on any of these shows, give me a call or an email, and we'll do another one.
Well, I'll do that. One of the things that I want to talk about in the future is that, and we can do it at a future date, is the dedication and loyalty of the volunteers. And some of them come across country and spend their summer vacation at the LeMay. They'll stay in the Marymount Academy where the boys used to sleep. They'll stay there. Some of them will stay with the LeMay homes. Some bring their motor homes. But we've had some dedicated volunteers, and there's some interesting stories about a lot of them as well.
I'm sure.
So I'll tell you next time the story about the cheese cutting contest.
Oh boy! Now you teased.
And that's a good one. That's a good one.
That's great. Well, and by the way, next time we're going to have to try to muzzle Dave here because he just won't stop.
Yeah, it just keeps rolling off the tongue.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Well, that is grand. Charlie, thanks once again. Dave, I appreciate you kind of arranging this because a lot of this was behind the scenes.
It's a privilege to hear this and to be part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, fellas, I really appreciate it. Again, you got a wide open invitation for part 4, 5, 6, 25, and 32. Yeah. So anytime you want, you're welcome to come back.
The Hot Rod Podcast is sponsored by the Idaho Hot Rod Hall of Fame, a nonprofit organization that recognizes and rewards men and women who actively promote the hot rod community, clubs, and builders all over the state of Idaho. Every year we award a Hot Rodder of the Year, a Club of the Year, and a Young Rodder of the Year, as well as giving out scholarship money to students in the auto trades programs at local colleges. If you want to know more, or if you want to nominate an honoree, go to idahof.org or email us at idahof@gmail.com. That's Idahof, IDAHHOF.org, or again, idahof@gmail.com.
Man, that was a good one. I want to thank Charlie and Dave Maxwell for stopping by and regaling us with some terrific stories about Harold LeMay, and a lot of insights there that the average person who goes to that collection or the collection at Marymount might not know. Definitely, Charlie was there, at the beginning and was with Harold right up to the end. And one of the things that he mentioned during the show was an Edsel station wagon that he acquired. And since Ron, who is not here tonight again, is a big fan of Edsels, he said they had one. I'm going to run the picture of the Edsel station wagon right here. And we will see you guys next time. That's it for this episode of the Hot Rod Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to our show, and we appreciate it if you smash those notification buttons too, so you'll know when a new one drops. For Ron Foreman, I'm Brady Wright. This has been the Hot Rod Podcast. We'll see you on the next one.